Of course, the first question on everyone's mind would be, how did the geopolitical posture of Myanmar change after the coup?
I think this military coup in 2021 is much different from the previous military coup in 1988. In 1988, the neighboring country like Asean, and China, India, they give much more lenient, like protection to Myanmar military. So then, but after 2021, ASEAN do not protect Myanmar military. They even sanction Myanmar, not allow Myanmar military leaders to take part in the ASEAN summit. And also China no longer give a blank check the way that they used to do. So even in Chinese case, it's quite obvious China even agreed not to use veto against UN Security Council resolution on Myanmar. And also Chinese allow the parallel national unity government UN representative still representing the previous government, NLD government. So I think this is a different geopolitical context. That's why I think Myanmar military junta is getting closer to Russia. That's very interesting. Within 2 years, Burmese military leaders like Min Aung Hlaing, he visited 3 times to Russia, and he had even meeting with the President Putin. So that's in a way raised concern for the neighboring countries. I think the Burmese military is very clever to use one actor against another. This time, previously they used China against the West and then ASEAN. This time they use effectively, cleverly Russia to raise concern in the neighborhood. So that's why I think late last year, the India, China, and ASEAN trying to recalibrating their policy toward Myanmar.
So there's obviously an internal and an external dimension to this shift in the geopolitical posture. If you look inside first and look at the development prospects of Myanmar, thinking about foreign direct investment, infrastructure projects, access to currency, these kind of things, what do you think that this shift in posture has been doing for Myanmar?
Myanmar is still very, unstable, highly militarized. So I don't think that manufacturing industry and other industry that can help the ordinary people to grow will be, conducive in Myanmar right now. So that's why you can expect more extractive, industry, such as like rare earth mining, such as hydropower, and also the neighboring country can use Myanmar as a regional geopolitical hub. To use, for example, like the western part of Myanmar, Chaopyu project, which allowed China to have access to Indian Ocean. So China will continue that kind of project. In general, the people-centered, social welfare-oriented development is very unlikely in near future. So I would say in terms of even foreign direct investment trade, so long as broader international Western sanction is imposed, in place, it's very difficult for Myanmar to attract, the investment and trade that will help the ordinary people. But it will be more and more armed groups trying to get a different cut from the different neighboring country to basically extract natural resources and then to do their own, what we call the ceasefire crony capitalism is likely to be the future trend.
Examples are interesting, examples of these kind of big ticket projects that are going on that have a geopolitical dimension.
I think the most obvious one is multi-billion-dollar China project in western part of Myanmar, like Arakan states, where you have the Chaopyu deep sea port and a special economic zone that's allowed China to have direct access to Indian Ocean and also to have a shortcut, to export, transport fuels and commodities, bypassing Malacca Straits, which China is serious concern about the security consideration. So I think that's a key one. I think Chinese are using what we call the China-Myanmar economic corridor as more and more integral part of Chinese international land and sea based trade corridors, which is basically using Myanmar as a hub to reach out to Southeast Asia and beyond. So we have been seeing at least 4 transnational corridors through Myanmar, even after the military coup. So these are another significant thing. And also the third element is, I think, mineral. rare earth. Myanmar is one of the largest production of the rare earth in the world. So Chinese mining company are very much involved together with the Myanmar different non-state armed groups, mining the rare earth. So this is another, I think, strategically important industry. On the other side, India also is interested in Myanmar, right? Especially India is like $1 billion, like I think about $500 million, that Caledon multimodal project, which allow Indian Northeast to have access to Indian Ocean, and also Indian, like the western part of India and the Northeast India need to have connection through Myanmar. So this is also a very important geopolitical and geoeconomic project. And in addition to this, India is building a trilateral highway which connect India, Myanmar, and Thailand, and beyond, of course. So I think these are the important geopolitical implications you can see in these different multi-millions and billion projects in Myanmar.
You already mentioned the neighbors, looking maybe southeast first to the partners in Asean. Like, what does this new posture actually mean for ASEAN, and what can ASEAN actually do in this situation?
Unfortunately, ASEAN unity has been tested, the Burmese crisis. And then we all know the maritime Southeast Asia, such as Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, they're more assertive, they're more, disappointed with the Burmese military crackdown. From the Chinese perspective, they are closer to the United States and the Western allies. But on the other hand, you have mainland Southeast Asia, which are more or less, authoritarian regime, and more or less sensitive to the Myanmar as their neighbor, because they know if something happened in Myanmar getting worsened, that refugee crisis, like other humanitarian crises, will have huge impact on them. So that's why the neighboring countries have a different view toward Myanmar. So you have that basic major divide, mainland Southeast Asia versus maritime Southeast Asia when it comes to Myanmar. I think that's why late last year, China, India supported Thailand initiative to create a new platform. They call it Track 1.5. The idea is neighborhood diplomacy. We know the best, right? So just leave this issue to us because we can handle it. So that's in a way undermine. They don't say it, they are going to undermine it, but in a way undermine ASEAN centrality. And of course, the United Nations and the Western initiatives seem to be more and more irrelevant when this Track 1.5 and neighborhood diplomacy became salient. I think this is in a way quite fit well with the Chinese agenda, because Chinese are like the Shanghai Cooperation, on the other hand, Lanchan Mekong, all these things are like part of Chinese neighborhood diplomacy. In this regard, ASEAN is in the deep water, because if they cannot recalibrate their policy, it will be, the entire initiative will be taken over by the neighborhood diplomacy, which we have to watch carefully.
Talking about ASEAN centrality, what can be done actually to regain the initiative?
I think in short term, I don't think they can do much, because no country in the world, no multilateral institution in the world can have a make or break leverage over Myanmar military, unless you use coercive diplomacy, right? But I don't think that's possible. So for ASEAN, I think the best thing is to have the longer time horizon. To view, I think it's encouraging ASEAN under Indonesia. Before Brunei and Cambodia focus a lot on Daw Aung San Suu Kyi and then the National League for Democracy, right? But now ASEAN under Indonesia come to realize this is a very complex issue, right? This is not just about democratization and governance and development. It's mainly about nation building failure. Unless we consider the importance role of ethnic equality and ethnic justice in this country, any resolution will not be sustainable. That's why I think Indonesia reached out to ethnic armed groups and other ethnic stakeholders. I think this is very important. So I think a new trend is ASEAN and even neighboring countries, they used to see ethnic conflict in Myanmar as a border security. Now they come to see more and more this is a nation building issue. So I think this is a good opportunity. I think ASEAN should use this as a long-term vision, and then don't impose too much on the short-term, immediate ambition because it will be counterproductive.
You already mentioned China. What kind of upsides and downsides are with this new situation for China?
I think China, as I said, no longer give blank check to Myanmar military. For example, Chinese are persuading Burmese military to hold election as soon as possible. They believe the status quo is not sustainable. They believe status quo is not conducive for their own even economic interests. So I think they really want to have some kind of exit that the Myanmar military can take. So for Chinese, ironically, they view the election, multi-party election, whatever you name it, that even under the Burmese military junta will be the best alternative than the current low-intensity anarchy. So I think that for Chinese, I think that we cannot dismiss the role of China in terms of political resolution and in terms of economic development in Myanmar. The only thing is Myanmar stakeholders need to be united and to speak up and what they want. Otherwise, it will be mainly driven by China. But I think China role is very important. We can't afford to do anti-Chinese thing in Myanmar because it's so important for us. We need to figure out how to find convergence between the Myanmar as a society, Myanmar as a nation interests and then Chinese interests.
Looking west, how about India?
I think India is a crucial important. I think India is somewhat so much preoccupied with their concern over China and Pakistan. Somewhat India seems to be still reactive when it comes to Myanmar policy. I think Chinese are more and more proactive and more assertive. I think India is now coming to realize they need to also reach out to other actors. I mean, the bottom line is Myanmar military is not the only reliable security partner. If you put all of your eggs in this basket, you'll be screwed, right? In terms of humanitarian, in terms of, you name it, the geopolitical disadvantages. For India, it's relatively slower when you compare to China. But I think India is now more and more active in reaching out to non-state actors and figure out what kind of, the positive role they can play in gradual, incremental resolution of the Myanmar crisis.
What's the impact on the other Western neighbor, Bangladesh?
This is really too much for Bangladesh with that Rohingya refugees they have been shouldering. I think for Bangladesh it's important. I think they are also having some conversation with the resistance movement and dissident opposition movement. I think it's a good sign. For Bangladesh, I think the main concern is with the Rohingya refugee issue. How do we deal with this? I think somewhat China involved in this game. I think one of the Chinese concerns is to mitigate this problem. I think China doesn't want Myanmar problem to become internationalized. Even though it happened, they try to mitigate this. That's how the neighborhood diplomacy and Chinese involvement in the Rohingya repatriation, all these things indicate, neighbor, they don't want, Myanmar issue become out of proportion or internationalized. It became like the proxy issue for the geopolitical rivalries.
But Russia, what can it actually offer in this particular situation?
I think Russia is very much opportunistic when it comes to this region. Before the engagement with the Myanmar is mainly to sell weapons, right, to make money. But after Ukraine, they want to get some kind of veneer of empire. This is at least some of these guys in that region are supporting me. So I think that type of political incentive later on kick in, but mainly opportunistic. So I don't see Russia understand the situation. I don't see Russia can play a role, significantly.